Waqf is a charitable endowment under Islamic law that plays an important role in Muslim societies. It is a philanthropic endowment that represents a sustainable form of charity with potential profits or benefits targeted at society's spiritual and economic improvement. Historically, Waqf has been regarded as a viable source of income for the community at large to provide public services and achieve a reduction in the levels of poverty in Muslim countries. In recent times, the important role of Waqf has been downplayed, which leads to the dual question of what drove the growth of Waqf initially and the reasons for the ensuing decline.
The Waqf industry is an interesting one. It's not been picked up as much as its rich cousin Islamic banking, but over the past 5 years, we have seen some interest in it, and it correlates with the fact that a lot of social responsible investments, UN SDGs, and they have also picked up in the financial space. I was looking at a report from by the World Bank and ISRA on Waqf, and according to them, about 80% of Waqf is in assets, which is real estate and other assets, and only about 15 to 20% are actually cash Waqf, what we know as cash Waqf. Those cash Waqfs, according to them, are an estimated value of about $35 billion. So it's not a small industry. Obviously, it's not as big as Islamic banking, but it's not a small industry. And we've seen over the past 5 or 10 years, there has been interest from governments as well as corporates to get involved in it. Historically, we've had this impediment that Waqf, especially from a fiqh perspective, has been seen as an asset, and you can't, the asset should remain, or the real estate or the property or the land should stay in its original form. But as of in modern times, we have had fatwas which have allowed for cash Waqf, and the principal amount of the Waqf should remain. That can be invested in socially responsible or Sharia compliant investments, and the returns can be used for whatever is needed. It can be a social welfare thing, it can be projects, multiple projects.
Through institution has been a pivotal point in Islamic civilization, offering many services to the community. In Islamic countries, dispersal of knowledge, construction of schools, mosques, and libraries, as well as funding the maintenance of students, were services provided by Waqf to the public. Waqf has also financed the construction of roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals, providing water sanitation and distribution as its service to the community. Not to mention the assistance directed towards the uplifting of less privileged sections of the community at large, regardless of their faith. Today, Waqf practice faces more challenges, namely legal issues, lack of awareness, knowledge and funds, idle assets, management inefficiencies, incomplete record data, and illegal invasion. Another critical hurdle is the need for transparency and proper management of its assets and resources.
One of the things was in classical sense or classical fiqh perspective, Waqf was seen as an asset class or based on an asset or real estate, or a physical building, for example. So it was very hard for it to gain traction from a lot of smaller or other, let's say, people who wanted to benefit through this vehicle. But we've seen that, cash Waqf have been allowed. So that's one of the things that has, triggered this growth or this interest. The second thing we'd see over the past 5-10 years is the governments being involved. There have been good regulations. I think even you see that the Bank Negara Malaysia's SECP, actually, Securities Exchange Commission of Malaysia, actually has a capital markets Waqf regulation, which is very interesting. It's classified also as a SRI asset class as well. So capital markets, these actual proper institutional, investors getting into this space and managing it. That's something very interesting we've seen. As of late, what we've seen is that there's also technology companies coming into this, which obviously naturally makes sense because fintech is the next iteration of finance, be it Islamic finance or conventional finance. And Waqf is a space that can actually benefit greatly from the use of technology and the use of blockchain and immutable ledgers. So this is something which we've seen. We've seen pockets of this, of course, not as in all Muslim countries are coming into this, and that's where the impediment or the challenges lie. There are still Waqf is still viewed as it's basically viewed as a class which is just for real estate or which is just giving your property. That's number one. The other thing is, because in a lot of countries, when you leave something for Waqf, and these were historically countries which have done great in Waqf, the subcontinent is an example, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. These were, for the past 200-300 years, were really into the Waqf thing. But what happened was, after the partition of both these countries, it's come under the government. And what we've seen is sometimes the government management is viewed cynically by people. I'm not going to comment, is it or isn't it, but it's the view of the people has been that they are mismanaged, So if I want to leave a Waqf, I can't leave it to someone as a private person to oversee it. Under law, that it has to be the Waqf, institute, or the government Waqf institute that has to oversee it. So that did stop, or that was a challenge. This is something that has to be addressed. Of course, technology needs to play a big part in it as well. And then regulations, not just the fact that the government, but regulations to streamline it as a proper asset class, a socially responsible investment asset class, or an ethical asset class, but nonetheless, an asset class which should be well managed, professionally.
To improve the efficiency of management and administration of Waqf institutions, several companies have introduced the use of new technologies such as blockchain and crowdfunding in efforts to tackle some of the Waqf challenges. These digital developments have resulted in new Waqf models such as Waqf crowd models, where cash donations are made by a crowd of donors, then invested in projects for the profits to be distributed to Waqf beneficiaries, and the Waqf coin model, where Waqf donations are tokenized on the blockchain. In both models, transparency is key, and donors can track the management and impact of their endowment.
So technology or financial technology currently, even in the Islamic space, is something new, and a lot of people are trying new things. I mean, I was looking at, and I've come across a few examples of institutions or companies or startups working in the Waqf space, which is very interesting. One is using blockchain, which is great because you have an immutable ledger. You can show publicly where the Waqf is investing its money, where the returns are coming from, and how that Waqf, let's say, for example, Waqf capital or Waqf building or whatever the asset is being used. So that's great. Your blockchain is coming in. I've also seen, how there's a platform for Waqf where individuals can choose a project, an ethical project they want to do, and multiple people can, as contributors to the Waqf, invest, let's say, so to say, invest in that ethical project using that platform, the tech platform, which is again very interesting. But again, it's early days. Like with Islamic, a lot of fintech startups in Islamic finance, it's early days. But if it continues and these are successfully executed over a longer period of time, I think this is very exciting. This is something which will bring more people into it. It's like having Robinhood, how Robinhood brought or Binance brought people into crypto or investing, right? So there is an opportunity here. There's a big opportunity here. It just needs to be executed correctly.
The wide range of stakeholders in the Waqf industry, particularly donors, increases the need for transparency and accountability. Being not-for-profit organizations, Waqf institutions do not have to prepare financial statements, yet Waqf managers today are using new metrics to measure the social and economic impact of Waqf that is considered as a form of long-term asset classes.
So I'll give you an example. I sit on the board of the CBB, Central Bank of Bahrain's Waqf Fund, and it's an interesting example. It was set up by all Islamic banks in Bahrain to promote awareness and education in Islamic finance for Bahrain and obviously outside Bahrain as well. It's about, if I'm not mistaken, $7 million. And the money is invested, and the returns that are generated are used for educational purposes, awareness purposes, and projects. I mean, certain IOFI projects or IIFM projects, or even ISRA. An ISRA book was recently sponsored as well by us, by the Waqf Fund. So that's one of the SDGs, for example, education, that is being used. And there are multiple such examples how Waqf can clearly complement these UN SDGs and the SRIs. So that is where the finance industry, not just Islamic finance, the finance industry is heading. You've got your ethical sukuks, even your ethical finance bonds, and so on and so forth on the conventional side. That's an interesting thing. How do we measure this? Now, Waqf is not charity as such. Yes, it's for a good purpose, but I think the measurement of a waqf should be both from a financial perspective, i.e., is the capital being preserved properly? Are the investments Sharia compliant? And are they the best investments that can get the return? So it's not just the impact from a social perspective. Waqf, because it's a long-term asset class, let's say, I'm calling it an asset class, but you can call it a social financial vehicle, because you can't dissolve a waqf. It's not that easy that today I go into waqf and 2 years from now I say, I want to take my money out. It doesn't work like that. You see, it's a long-term asset class or social responsible asset class. So the investments that have to be made cannot be too risky. They have to ensure that the capital is preserved for future generations to benefit off of as well. So from a financial perspective, you need to obviously address those issues and measure the impact of the waqf. But also from a socially responsible, ethical point of view, of course, you have to have, for example, matrices such as, if it's a building that you're going to invest in, is it a green building? So you can have impact matrices such as, the carbon footprint of the building. Previous such buildings have had a carbon footprint. Are we reducing the carbon footprint? From an education perspective, again, that's one of the UN SDGs, education, right? You can say how many people were, for example, trained in X, Y, or Z, or how many people, or how many kids in primary education have we, give training to. So the impact of both, I think, not just from a social perspective, but also from a financial perspective. Both impacts are very important to a waqf.